The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as Marcus Williams adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. The golden buttons gleamed against the deep red fabric, and his polished boots reflected the ancient stone walls that had witnessed centuries of royal history. At 28 years old, Marcus had served as a royal guard for 6 years, but today felt different somehow. There was an electricity in the air that made his instincts sharper than usual. The annual Children's Day celebration was always a special occasion at the palace. Hundreds of local school children would arrive with their teachers and parents to tour the historic grounds, meet some of the royal family members, and participate in traditional games and activities. It was one of the few times each year when the usually quiet palace grounds would echo with the laughter and excited chatter of young voices. Marcus stood at his assigned position near the main entrance, watching as the first buses began to arrive. Children pressed their faces against the windows, their eyes wide with wonder at the sight of the magnificent palace. Teachers tried to maintain order while parents fumbled with cameras, hoping to capture every precious moment of their children's royal adventure. Among the arriving groups was a class from Riverside Elementary School. Their teacher, Mrs. Patricia Henderson, had been planning this trip for months. She had prepared her students with stories about the palace's history, taught them proper etiquette for meeting royalty, and reminded them countless times about staying with the group and following all the rules. 8-year-old Emma Thompson bounced excitedly beside her best friend Sarah as they climbed off the bus. Emma had been talking about this trip for weeks, telling everyone who would listen about how she was going to see a real palace where actual princes and princesses lived. Her blonde curls bounced as she skipped alongside her classmates, clutching a small notebook where she planned to write down everything she saw. The palace staff had prepared a wonderful program for the children. They would start with a guided tour of the public rooms, including the grand ballroom where royal weddings and state dinners were held. Then they would visit the palace gardens, where they could see the famous maze and the fountain that had been built 300 years ago. The highlight of the day would be a brief meeting with Prince Edward, the youngest member of the royal family, who loved interacting with children and always made sure to attend these special events. As the children gathered in the courtyard, Marcus noticed something that made him pause. Among the group of parents and chaperones, one man seemed different from the others. He was tall and thin, with dark hair and nervous eyes that kept darting around the courtyard. While other adults were chatting with each other or helping to organize the children, this man stood apart, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his long coat despite the warm weather. The man's name was David Crawford, though none of the school staff knew much about him. He had volunteered to help as a chaperone just 2 days before the trip, claiming to be the uncle of one of the students. The teacher had been grateful for the extra help, especially since another parent had canceled at the last minute due to illness. In the rush of final preparations, no one had thought to verify his identity or ask for the usual background check that was required for school volunteers. Marcus continued to observe the group as they moved through the courtyard. His training had taught him to notice details that others might miss, to spot anything that seemed out of place or potentially dangerous. The nervous man's behavior was beginning to set off alarm bells in his mind, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what was wrong. Perhaps it was the way the man avoided making eye contact with anyone, or how he seemed to be studying the palace layout rather than enjoying the experience like the other adults. The children's excitement was infectious as they entered the palace's grand entrance hall. The ceiling soared 40 feet above them, decorated with intricate paintings and golden moldings. A magnificent chandelier hung in the center, its crystal pieces catching the light and throwing rainbows across the marble floor. Emma gasped in amazement, immediately scribbling notes in her little notebook about the sparkly lights dancing on the walls. As the group moved deeper into the palace, Marcus followed at a respectful distance, maintaining his professional demeanor while keeping a careful eye on everyone present. The tour guide, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Hartwell who had been giving palace tours for over 20 years, was in his element. He told captivating stories about the kings and queens who had lived in these rooms, about grand parties and important meetings that had shaped the history of the nation. The children listened with rapt attention as Mr. Hartwell explained how the dining room table could seat 50 people, and how the kitchen had once employed over 100 cooks and servants to prepare meals for royal banquets. Parents snapped photos while trying to keep their excited children from touching the priceless antiques and artwork that decorated every room. But Marcus's attention kept returning to David Crawford. The man had positioned himself at the back of the group, and Marcus noticed that he wasn't really listening to the tour guide's stories. Instead, his eyes were constantly moving, taking in every doorway, every corridor, every possible exit route. His behavior was becoming more suspicious by the minute, and Marcus made a mental note to keep him under closer observation as the tour continued. The group's next stop would be the throne room, where generations of monarchs had held court and made decisions that affected millions of lives. It was also where Prince Edward would be waiting to meet the children, a moment that Emma and her classmates had been anticipating all morning. None of them could have imagined that their magical day at the palace was about to take a terrifying turn that would test the skills and courage of everyone present. The throne room was the most magnificent space in the entire palace, and the children fell silent with awe as they entered. The massive room stretched nearly 100 feet in length, with towering windows that allowed golden sunlight to stream across the polished marble floor. At the far end of the room sat the ancient throne, carved from oak trees that had grown in the royal forest for over 500 years. The walls were lined with portraits of former kings and queens, their painted eyes seeming to watch over all who entered their sacred space. Prince Edward was already waiting for the children, standing casually beside the throne with a warm smile on his face. At 35 years old, he was known throughout the kingdom for his genuine love of children and his dedication to various charitable causes. He had specifically requested to meet with this group of young visitors, knowing how much joy these interactions brought to both him and the children. Emma could hardly contain her excitement as she saw the real prince standing just a few feet away. He looked exactly like the pictures in her storybooks, with kind eyes and a friendly smile that made her feel like she was meeting a character from one of her favorite fairy tales. She clutched her notebook tighter, already planning to write about this magical moment. Mrs. Henderson organized the children into a neat semicircle in front of the prince, with parents and chaperones forming a second row behind them. The children were practically vibrating with excitement, whispering to each other about how they were actually meeting real royalty. Prince Edward chuckled at their enthusiasm, remembering his own childhood wonder when his grandfather had first shown him this very room. Marcus positioned himself along the side wall, where he could maintain a clear view of the entire room while staying out of the way of the children's special moment. His eyes automatically scanned the crowd, noting the positions of all the adults present. His gaze lingered on David Crawford, who had moved to a position near one of the large windows. The man's nervous energy seemed to have intensified since entering the throne room, and Marcus noticed that his hands were no longer visible, hidden somewhere within his coat. Prince Edward began to speak to the children, asking them about their school and their favorite subjects. His natural ability to connect with young people was evident as the children quickly overcame their initial shyness and began asking him questions about life in the palace. Emma raised her hand eagerly, asking if he really ate breakfast in bed every morning like she had read in a book. The prince laughed heartily, explaining that he actually preferred to eat in the kitchen with the palace staff because they were much more fun to talk to than the fancy dining room walls. The relaxed atmosphere in the room was suddenly shattered when David Crawford began to move. Marcus watched with growing alarm as the man pushed through the crowd of parents, his movements becoming more agitated and purposeful. Other adults stepped aside, assuming he was simply trying to get a better view of the children meeting the prince. But Marcus could see something in the man's eyes that sent chills down his spine. A wild, desperate look that spoke of dangerous intentions. Emma was in the middle of asking another question when David Crawford broke free from the group of adults. In one swift motion, he reached into his coat and withdrew a long, gleaming knife. The blade caught the light streaming through the windows, creating a flash that seemed to freeze time itself. Gasps and screams erupted from the parents as they realized what was happening, but their shock left them momentarily paralyzed. Crawford's target became horrifyingly clear as he lunged toward Emma, who was standing in the front row of children. The little girl was completely unaware of the danger approaching her from behind, still looking up at Prince Edward with bright, innocent eyes. Her notebook fell from her hands as Crawford's arm rose above his head, the knife aimed directly at her small form. The other children began to scream as they noticed the terrifying figure bearing down on their classmate. Mrs. Henderson reached out desperately, but she was too far away to intervene. Parents scrambled to reach their own children, creating chaos in the previously orderly room. Prince Edward's face transformed from confusion to horror as he realized what was happening just feet in front of him. But Marcus had been watching Crawford. From the moment something felt wrong about the man's behavior, his years of training kicked in instantly, his body moving before his mind had time to fully process the situation. Every second of his preparation for exactly this type of threat now became crucial. He had studied countless scenarios, practiced endless drills, and prepared himself mentally for the day when someone might try to harm those under his protection. The distance between Marcus and the attacker seemed impossibly far, but his powerful legs carried him across the marble floor with surprising speed. His dress uniform, which moments before had been a symbol of ceremony and tradition, now became the costume of a protector racing to save an innocent life. The golden buttons that had gleamed so proudly in the morning sun now reflected the urgency of a life-or-death situation. Time seemed to slow as Marcus calculated angles and distances, his trained mind automatically assessing the best way to stop Crawford without endangering Emma or any of the other children. The knife was descending toward the little girl, who had finally turned around and seen the weapon aimed at her. Her scream joined the cacophony of terror that filled the throne room, but Marcus knew that in seconds it might be too late to save her. Crawford's face was twisted with a madness that spoke of months or perhaps years of planning for this moment. Whatever had driven him to this desperate act, he was clearly beyond reason. The only thing that mattered now was stopping him before he could complete his horrific plan. As Marcus launched himself through the air, every muscle in his body focused on one single goal: reaching Emma before the knife could reach her. Marcus's body moved with the precision of a trained athlete and the desperation of a man trying to save a child's life. His powerful leap carried him across the throne room in what felt like slow motion, every second stretching into an eternity, as the knife continued its deadly arc toward Emma's small frame. The little girl stood frozen in terror, her blue eyes wide with shock as she finally understood the danger that had appeared from nowhere. The collision between Marcus and Crawford was tremendous. Marcus's shoulder struck the attacker just as the knife was inches from Emma's head, sending both men crashing to the marble floor with a sound that echoed through the vast chamber. The knife flew from Crawford's hand, spinning through the air before skittering across the polished stone and coming to rest near the base of the ancient throne. Emma stumbled backward, tears streaming down her face as she finally processed how close she had come to unimaginable harm. Mrs. Henderson rushed forward and pulled the sobbing child into her arms, while other teachers quickly gathered the rest of the children and moved them toward the far end of the room, away from the violence that had erupted in their midst. On the floor, Marcus and Crawford struggled fiercely. The attacker was thin but surprisingly strong, fueled by whatever madness had driven him to attempt such a horrific act. He clawed at Marcus's uniform, trying to break free and reach for the fallen knife. His eyes still held that wild, desperate look, and it was clear that he had not given up on completing his deadly mission. Marcus used his superior training and physical condition to maintain control of the situation. Years of practice in hand-to-hand combat now proved their worth as he pinned Crawford's arms and used his body weight to keep the dangerous man from moving. Crawford thrashed and struggled, screaming incoherently about injustices and revenge, but Marcus held firm, knowing that any loosening of his grip could give the attacker another chance to harm innocent people. Prince Edward, despite the shock of what had just happened, quickly took charge of the larger situation. His royal training had prepared him for crisis management, and he immediately began directing the evacuation of the throne room. His calm, authoritative voice cut through the chaos as he instructed the teachers to escort all children to the palace's secure conference room, where they could be kept safe while the situation was resolved. Other royal guards had heard the commotion and were already rushing toward the throne room. Within minutes, the massive doors burst open as a team of 4 additional guards entered with weapons drawn. They quickly assessed the situation and moved to assist Marcus in securing the attacker. Crawford continued to struggle even as he was, surrounded, his mind clearly lost to whatever delusions had driven him to this desperate act. As backup arrived, Marcus was finally able to catch his breath and fully process what had just happened. His dress uniform was torn and dirty from the struggle, and his hands were scraped from sliding across the marble floor. But he felt an overwhelming sense of relief that Emma was safe. The little girl was still crying in her teacher's arms, but she was alive and unharmed, which was all that mattered. The palace's head of security, Captain Reynolds, arrived within minutes of the incident. He was a stern man in his 50s who had overseen royal protection for over 2 decades. His weathered face showed no emotion as he surveyed the scene, but Marcus knew that behind those calculating eyes, the captain was already formulating plans to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. Crawford was finally subdued and restrained, though he continued to mutter angrily under his breath. Medical personnel were called to examine both him and Marcus. Though the guard insisted, he was fine despite the scrapes and bruises from his heroic tackle. The attacker's knife was carefully collected as evidence, and the entire throne room was secured as a crime scene. As the immediate danger passed, the full magnitude of what had almost occurred began to sink in for everyone present. Parents held their children tighter, unable to imagine how close they had come to witnessing an unspeakable tragedy. The teachers who had worked so hard to plan this special day were devastated that their wonderful trip had nearly ended in horror. Prince Edward made a point of personally checking on each child and parent before they left the palace. Despite his own shock at what had happened, he wanted to ensure that everyone felt safe and supported. He spent extra time with Emma, gently explaining that the bad man could never hurt her now, and that there would always be brave people like Marcus ready to protect children like her. Mrs. Henderson struggled to find words to thank Marcus for his incredible bravery. Through her tears, she kept repeating how grateful she was that he had been there, that his quick thinking and decisive action had prevented an unthinkable tragedy. Marcus, still somewhat in shock himself, simply nodded and assured her that protecting innocent people was what he had sworn to do when he became a royal guard. The investigation into Crawford's background and motives began immediately. Detectives would soon discover that he was not actually related to any of the children, as he had claimed when volunteering to chaperone the trip. His real identity revealed a troubled man with a history of mental illness and a growing obsession with the royal family that had apparently twisted into something dangerous and violent. As the throne room finally emptied of everyone except security, personnel and investigators, Marcus stood alone for a moment, looking at the spot where Emma had been standing when Crawford attacked. He thought about how different this day could have ended. How many lives would have been forever changed if he had been even a second slower in his response? The weight of that responsibility and the relief of having met it successfully would stay with him for the rest of his life. News of the attack spread quickly throughout the palace and beyond its walls. Within hours, reporters had gathered outside the main gates, eager to learn details about what was being called the throne room incident. The royal family's press secretary worked diligently to control the flow of information, ensuring that the privacy of the children and their families was protected, while still acknowledging the serious nature of what had occurred. Emma's parents, Sarah and Michael Thompson, received the phone call no parent ever wants to get. Mrs. Henderson's voice shook as she explained what had happened, emphasizing repeatedly that Emma was completely safe and unharmed. The drive to the palace felt like the longest journey of their lives, their minds racing with terrible possibilities, even though they had been assured their daughter was okay. When they finally reached Emma, she ran into their arms and refused to let go for nearly an hour. The trauma of the experience had left her shaken and confused, unable to fully understand why someone would want to hurt her when she had done nothing wrong. Child psychologists were already on standby at the palace, ready to provide counseling services for Emma and any other children who needed support in processing what they had witnessed. The investigation into David Crawford's background revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior that had escalated over several months. Detectives discovered that he had been watching the palace from various locations, taking photographs and making detailed notes about security procedures and visitor schedules. His apartment contained newspaper clippings about the royal family dating back several years, along with journals filled with increasingly erratic writings about perceived injustices and elaborate revenge fantasies. Crawford had apparently become obsessed with the idea that the royal family was somehow responsible for his personal failures and disappointments in life. He had lost his job 6 months earlier, gone through a bitter divorce, and had been struggling with untreated mental illness. In his twisted mind, attacking an innocent child during a public event would somehow bring attention to his grievances and cause pain to those he blamed for his problems. Mental health experts who examined Crawford after his arrest determined that he had been suffering from severe paranoid delusions that had completely disconnected him from reality. His plan to harm Emma had not been random. He had specifically chosen to target a child because he believed it would cause maximum emotional damage to Prince Edward and the royal family. The calculated cruelty of his intentions made the incident even more disturbing for everyone involved. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself thrust into an unwanted spotlight. Palace officials wanted to commend his heroic actions, but he felt uncomfortable with the attention. He had simply done his job. He insisted to anyone who would listen. Protecting innocent people was what he had sworn to do when he took his oath as a royal guard, and he would do the same thing again without hesitation if faced with a similar situation. Captain Reynolds conducted a thorough review of palace security procedures in the wake of the attack. While he praised Marcus's quick thinking and decisive action, he was troubled by how easily Crawford had managed to infiltrate the group of school chaperones. New protocols were immediately implemented requiring more extensive background checks for anyone seeking access to royal events, even in seemingly innocent circumstances like school trips. The other children who had witnessed the attack were also struggling to process what they had seen. Some had nightmares about the scary man with the knife, while others seemed to withdraw into themselves, reluctant to talk about their experience at the palace. School counselors worked closely with parents to provide appropriate support and therapy for each child, recognizing that trauma affects everyone differently. Prince Edward was particularly affected by the incident, knowing that he had been just feet away when Crawford attacked Emma. He couldn't stop thinking about how helpless he had felt in that moment, watching a dangerous man threaten a child and being too far away to intervene. His respect and gratitude for Marcus's heroic actions were immense, but he also felt a heavy burden of responsibility for the safety of all visitors to the palace. The prince decided to visit Emma at her home a few days after the incident, bringing with him a special gift to help her remember that good people would always work to protect children like her. He presented her with a beautiful music box featuring a tiny dancing princess, explaining that brave knights would always guard princesses and keep them safe from danger. Emma's face lit up with wonder as she watched the little figure spin to the gentle melody, and for the first time since the attack, she seemed to recapture some of her childhood innocence. The royal family also arranged for Marcus to receive a formal commendation for his heroic actions, though the ceremony would be kept private at his request. The Queen herself insisted on personally thanking the guard who had prevented a tragedy from occurring in her palace. She recognized that his split-second decision to act had not only saved Emma's life, but had also prevented an incident that could have traumatized hundreds of other children and their families. Mrs. Henderson and the other teachers from Riverside Elementary struggled with feelings of guilt over the incident. They questioned whether they had been too trusting in accepting Crawford's offer to help chaperone the trip, wondering if they should have been more suspicious of his last-minute volunteer request. School administrators assured them that they had followed all established procedures and could not have predicted such a bizarre and dangerous deception. The incident also sparked broader discussions about mental health resources and the need for better systems to identify and help individuals who might pose a danger to themselves or others. Crawford's family revealed that they had been worried about his increasingly erratic behavior, but had not known how to get him the help he needed. His spiral into violence might have been prevented with proper intervention and treatment. As the initial shock of the attack began to fade, the focus shifted to healing and recovery for all those affected. Emma was gradually returning to her normal activities, though her parents noticed she was more cautious around strangers and sometimes asked questions about why bad people existed in the world. They worked patiently to help her understand that most people were good and kind, and that there would always be heroes like Marcus ready to protect innocent children. 3 months after the attack, life had begun to settle into new patterns for everyone involved in the throne room incident. Emma had returned to school and was participating in her regular activities, though she still carried the special music box from Prince Edward wherever she went. The gentle melody and dancing princess inside had become a source of comfort during moments when memories of that frightening day crept back into her thoughts. Marcus had been promoted to Senior Royal Guard, a recognition of not only his heroic actions but also his exemplary service record over the years. With the promotion came additional responsibilities, including training newer guards in emergency response procedures. He took this role seriously, knowing that sharing his experience could help prepare others to protect innocent lives if faced with similar situations. The training sessions Marcus conducted became some of the most intensive and realistic in the palace's history. He worked with his trainees to develop split-second decision-making skills, emphasizing that protection duty was not just about standing at attention in ceremonial uniforms. Every guard needed to be constantly alert, ready to assess threats and respond instantly when innocent lives were in danger. During one particularly memorable training session, Marcus recreated the throne room scenario using volunteers to play different roles. He walked the new guards through his thought process during those crucial moments, explaining how he had noticed Crawford's suspicious behavior long before the actual attack occurred. The lesson was clear. Effective protection required constant vigilance and the ability to recognize danger signs before a situation escalated to violence. Emma's recovery had been aided significantly by regular therapy sessions with Dr. Patricia Collins, a child psychologist who specialized in helping young people process traumatic experiences. Dr. Collins used art therapy and play-based techniques to help Emma understand and express her feelings about what had happened. Through drawing pictures and telling stories with toy figures, Emma gradually worked through her fears and began to reclaim her sense of safety in the world. One breakthrough moment came when Emma drew a picture of the throne room scene. But instead of focusing on Crawford and the knife, her artwork emphasized Marcus flying through the air like a superhero. In her 8-year-old interpretation of events, the Royal Guard had become a real-life knight in shining armor, complete with a cape and magical powers. Dr. Collins recognized this as a healthy sign that Emma was processing the trauma by focusing on the positive outcome rather than dwelling on the danger she had faced. Prince Edward had established a new foundation dedicated to improving mental health resources and crisis intervention programs. He felt a personal responsibility to ensure that troubled individuals like Crawford could receive help before their problems escalated to violence. The foundation worked with hospitals, schools, and community organizations to identify people at risk and connect them with appropriate treatment and support services. The Prince's first major initiative was a partnership with local schools to provide better training for teachers and staff in recognizing signs of mental health crises. He understood that Crawford had managed to fool school officials because they lacked the knowledge to spot the warning signs of someone experiencing severe psychological problems. By improving awareness and education, similar deceptions might be prevented in the future. David Crawford himself had been committed to a secure psychiatric facility where he was receiving intensive treatment for his mental illness. The medication and therapy were gradually helping to clear his mind of the delusions that had driven him to attempt such a horrific act. As his thinking became more rational, Crawford began to express genuine remorse for what he had tried to do, though he still struggled to fully understand how his problems had led him to target an innocent child. The legal proceedings against Crawford were handled with sensitivity to all parties involved. Given his severe mental illness at the time of the attack, the court focused on ensuring he received proper treatment rather than simply punishing him. He would remain in the psychiatric facility for several years, with regular evaluations to assess his progress and determine when he might safely be released back into the community. Mrs. Henderson and her fellow teachers had implemented new safety protocols for all school trips and activities involving outside volunteers. Background checks were now more thorough, and multiple references were required before anyone could serve as a chaperone. While these measures added complexity to organizing events, everyone agreed that the safety of children was worth any additional effort required. The incident had also led to changes in how the palace handled public events. Security screenings were now more comprehensive, and plainclothes guards mingled with visitors during tours and celebrations. The goal was to maintain the open, welcoming atmosphere that made royal events special, while ensuring that dangerous individuals could be identified and stopped before they could cause harm. Captain Reynolds had used the Crawford incident as a case study for security teams throughout the government. The attack demonstrated how quickly a seemingly normal situation could turn deadly, and how crucial it was for protection personnel to trust their instincts when something felt wrong. Marcus's ability to identify Crawford as a potential threat, even before any overt aggressive behavior occurred, became a textbook example of effective threat assessment. Emma's parents, Sarah and Michael, had struggled with their own trauma following the attack. The knowledge that their daughter had come so close to serious harm haunted their dreams and made them more protective in their daily lives. They joined a support group for parents of children who had experienced trauma, finding comfort in sharing their fears and concerns with others who understood their situation. The media attention surrounding the incident had gradually faded, but the story of Marcus's heroic actions continued to inspire people around the world. He received letters from children thanking him for protecting Emma, from parents expressing gratitude for his service, and from fellow security personnel who saw him as a role model for their profession. Though he remained uncomfortable with the praise, Marcus understood that his story could encourage others to be brave when facing dangerous situations. As the one-year anniversary of the attack approached, plans were being made for a private ceremony to honor Marcus's actions and to celebrate Emma's complete recovery. Prince Edward wanted to recognize not just the heroism displayed that day, but also the resilience and strength shown by all those affected by Crawford's violent act. The ceremony would serve as both a commemoration of a difficult moment and a celebration of the human capacity to overcome trauma and emerge stronger from challenging experiences. 1 year after the attack, Emma Thompson walked confidently through the palace gates once again, but this time the circumstances were completely different. She wore her best dress, a bright yellow one with tiny flowers that her mother had bought specially for this important day. In her hands she carried the music box Prince Edward had given her, now slightly worn from constant companionship, but still playing its gentle melody perfectly. The private ceremony was held in the palace's intimate rose garden, rather than the throne room where the attack had occurred. Prince Edward had deliberately chosen this peaceful setting, surrounded by blooming flowers and singing birds, to create new positive memories that could help heal the painful associations with that terrible day. The garden's beauty and tranquility provided the perfect backdrop for celebrating courage, recovery, and the triumph of good over evil. Marcus stood at attention in his dress uniform, which had been specially tailored to accommodate the new insignia that marked his promotion to Senior Royal Guard. The golden threads and ceremonial decorations gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, but today they represented something much more meaningful than mere tradition. They symbolized a man who had put his own life at risk to protect an innocent child, embodying the very best qualities of service and sacrifice. Emma's parents, Sarah and Michael, watched with pride and gratitude as their daughter approached Marcus, without any sign of fear or anxiety. The therapy sessions with Dr. Collins had been incredibly effective, helping Emma process her trauma and emerge stronger from the experience. She had learned that bad things sometimes happened in the world, but that good people would always work to keep children safe from harm. Prince Edward began the ceremony by addressing the small group of family members, palace staff and security personnel who had gathered to witness this special moment. He spoke eloquently about the importance of courage in the face of danger, and how ordinary people could become heroes when called upon to protect others. His words carried special weight because he had witnessed firsthand how quickly a pleasant day could turn into a nightmare, and how one person's bravery could make all the difference. The formal commendation presented to Marcus was unprecedented in the history of the Royal Guard. Never before had a guard received such recognition for actions taken during active duty, and the medal created specially for this occasion would become a permanent part of the palace's collection of honors. The inscription read simply, "For extraordinary courage in the protection of innocents, But those few words captured the essence of what had made Marcus's actions so remarkable. Emma had practiced a short speech that she wanted to give to Marcus, and despite her young age, she delivered it with remarkable composure. She thanked him for being her real-life knight, and told him that she thought about his bravery every time she wound up her music box. Her words brought tears to the eyes of everyone present, including Marcus himself, who had maintained his professional composure throughout the ceremony until that moment. Mrs. Henderson and several other teachers from Riverside Elementary were also present at the ceremony, representing not just Emma's school but all educators who work tirelessly to create safe and positive experiences for children. The attack had taught them valuable lessons about security and vigilance, but it had also reinforced their commitment to ensuring that children could continue to explore and learn about the world around them without being paralyzed by fear. Dr. Collins, who had worked so patiently with Emma throughout her recovery, observed the ceremony with professional satisfaction and personal joy. Watching Emma interact confidently with Marcus and speak publicly about her experience was powerful evidence of the resilience of children when given proper support and care. The little girl's transformation from a traumatized victim to a confident survivor demonstrated the healing power of time, therapy, and love. Captain Reynolds presented Marcus with a special assignment that would take effect immediately after the ceremony. He was being placed in charge of developing new training programs for Royal Protection personnel throughout the country, sharing his expertise and experience with guards at all levels. This role would allow him to have a lasting impact on security procedures, potentially preventing similar incidents from occurring in the future. The ceremony concluded with Prince Edward presenting Emma with a special gift, a scholarship fund, that would support her education through college and beyond. He explained that brave children who showed such strength in difficult situations deserved every opportunity to grow up and make positive contributions to the world. Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement as she realized this meant she could pursue her dream of becoming a teacher like Mrs. Henderson. As the formal proceedings ended, the group moved to the palace's family dining room for a celebration lunch. The atmosphere was warm and joyful, a stark contrast to the fear and chaos that had marked their previous gathering exactly 1 year earlier. Emma sat between Marcus and Prince Edward, chattering happily about school, her friends, and her plans for the future, showing no lingering effects from her traumatic experience. David Crawford, meanwhile, had made significant progress in his treatment at the psychiatric facility. His doctors reported that the medication and therapy had helped stabilize his mental condition, and he was beginning to participate in rehabilitation programs designed to help him develop coping skills and build a support network. While he would likely never fully understand what had driven him to attempt such a horrible act, he had expressed genuine remorse for his actions and gratitude that no one had been seriously harmed. The incident at the palace had sparked changes that extended far beyond the royal grounds. Schools across the country had implemented stricter volunteer screening procedures. Mental health awareness programs had received increased funding and support, and security protocols at public institutions had been reviewed and strengthened. These systemic improvements meant that Crawford's twisted plan had ultimately resulted in better protection for countless other children. Marcus returned to his duties with a renewed sense of purpose and responsibility. The recognition ceremony had been meaningful, but he understood that his real reward was seeing Emma healthy, happy, and unafraid. Every day when he put on his uniform and took his position at the palace, he carried with him the memory of that split-second decision that had changed so many lives. The training programs Marcus developed became highly respected throughout law enforcement and security communities worldwide. Delegations from other countries visited the palace to learn about his methods for threat assessment and rapid response. His emphasis on trusting instincts and acting decisively when innocent lives were at stake became standard doctrine for protection personnel everywhere. Emma continued to thrive as she grew older, and the palace became a symbol of safety and wonder for her rather than a place of trauma. She often told her friends at school about her special friend Marcus, who worked at the palace, and how brave people like him made sure that children could visit beautiful places without being afraid. Her positive attitude and resilience inspired other children who had faced difficult experiences. 5 years later, when Emma turned 13, She wrote a letter to Marcus thanking him again for his actions and telling him about her plans to study criminal justice in college. She wanted to help protect other children, she explained, just like he had protected her. The letter arrived on the anniversary of the attack, and Marcus kept it in his desk drawer as a reminder of why his work mattered so much. Prince Edward's Mental Health Foundation had grown into one of the most effective charitable organizations in the country, helping thousands of people receive the treatment and support they needed. The foundation's success was built on the understanding that preventing violence required addressing its root causes, including untreated mental illness, social isolation, and lack of access to appropriate care. The throne room where the attack had occurred was eventually reopened for tours, though new security measures remained permanently in place. A small plaque near the entrance, visible only to staff and security personnel, commemorated the events of that day with a simple message: "Vigilance protects innocence." It served as a daily reminder to all palace employees of their responsibility to keep visitors safe. Mrs. Henderson retired from teaching 3 years after the incident, but she remained in touch with Emma's family and often spoke at conferences about school safety and the importance of proper volunteer screening. Her experience had taught her that even the most careful planning could not prevent every possible danger, but that good people working together could overcome almost any challenge. As the years passed, the story of Marcus's heroic intervention became part of palace lore, told to new guards as an example of the highest ideals of their profession. The tale emphasized that being a royal guard meant much more than wearing a ceremonial uniform. It meant being ready at any moment to put one's life on the line to protect others, especially the most vulnerable members of society. Emma's music. Bach still played its gentle melody, though she no longer carried it everywhere. It sat on her bedroom dresser, a treasured reminder of a difficult time that had taught her about both the existence of evil in the world and the power of good people.